Hello boyos, Rich Boy J here back with another video, and this is going to be my top 10 list for the ugliest LEGO Star Wars minifigures. Minifigures are probably one of the biggest draws of LEGO sets nowadays. People just can't get enough of them minifigures, and it definitely makes sense. I feel LEGO has truly evolved the minifigure over the past few decades, and they've really honed in on the correct balance between good detail but still not overdoing it on the minifigure side, and I think the minifigures nowadays are just absolutely phenomenal. But things weren't always great. In fact, LEGO has a dark past with some of the minifigures they've created. Some of them you might call quite ugly. So let's jump right into it. Number 10 on my list is going to be the crispy Anakin figure from Palpatine's shuttle. Now this figure, it really isn't all that bad. I think that the detail on it is fine, but it's just kind of disturbing to look at. I remember the original burnt Anakin figure, which really just had a bunch of like red blood smears on his face. Nothing too much outside of that. And I mean, that one was certainly under detailed, but I don't know about this one. This one I feel they kind of missed on. His just burnt flesh kind of popping out through his clothes. It's just very unsettling to look at, especially because just the style of it, like, I don't know, it kind of looks like the ground on a desert. It's just kind of ugh. If we really even want to get technical about it, the burn styling on his body is not consistent with the burns on his face either. It really kind of looks like the head on this minifigure doesn't belong on this figure. It kind of looks like just a mismatch of random parts if you really dive deeply into it. But I don't know, just this is kind of a figure that's hard for me to look at. I really feel LEGO did a much better job representing burnt Anakin in the most recent iteration of this figure. This one, on the other hand, I'm going to give a thumbs down. Number 9 on my list is going to be the original Clone Wars Clone Trooper. I know I'm going to catch a lot of flack for this. This figure means a lot of things to a lot of people. I cannot say the same. This figure is probably what single-handedly sent me into my dark ages as a child. Whenever these sets were rumored to come out, I was super excited for it. Clone Wars sets, I was all in on it. And then when they finally dropped, I looked at the figures and it just wasn't the same as normal LEGO figures. So specifically about this figure, I know a lot of people are going to argue and say, you know, it's consistent with the Clone Wars art style, it's accurate to that, but that don't mean it ain't ugly. And my intention is simply that it's an ugly figure. Like, compare this to the most recent version of the Clone Trooper, or even the original version of the Phase 1 Clone Trooper. Those figures both just look so much better than this. For one, the visor on this one is just way too big. It stretches across the entire face. Even the shadow marks on the cheeks just look under detailed. And the torso, I always hated how the Clone Wars art style made everything all rounded and kind of flowy. I don't know, it just doesn't look good in my opinion at all. And it certainly doesn't help that it has the Clone Wars equivalent of the angry clone face underneath the helmet, which I'm not really a big fan of either. I have a couple other videos where I dive more extensively into why I don't like this figure, so you guys can check those out. But all in all, I just don't like this representation of the Phase 1 clone. Phase 1 clone is my favorite version of clones by far, and I just don't think this does it justice. Number 8 on my list is going to be the Rebels Stormtrooper. I realized I haven't really talked at length about how I feel about this figure on this channel, so let's just get right into it. You see that giant frown on that helmet? That giant frown? That's the face I make when I see this figure. This thing is awful. LEGO really just played the biggest practical joke on everyone when they released this figure in a battle pack and just had 4 of them, which is something that we'd ask for literally any other figure, but of course they give it to us with the worst possible figure. The frown is just so ugly. It is just a perversion of what a stormtrooper should look like, and I hate it. Once again, this is one of those scenarios where you say, you know, Jay, look, it's consistent with the Rebels art style, but once again, that does not mean that it's not ugly. I hate the way the Stormtroopers look in Rebels. I would even say that the LEGO version of the Stormtrooper from Rebels even further exaggerates the frown, if that's even possible. It just looks so bad, especially considering they tried to put it on that standard Stormtrooper helmet mold that they had been using for so long. It really does make me grumpy that this thing was so easy to get, because they could have given us a battle pack with 4 standard troops of literally any other variety, and I probably would have been happy with it. That's something that I think a lot of people would appreciate. But instead, as of now, this is the most recent battle pack we've gotten with 4 of the same troop, and I think that sucks. To a lesser extent, the torso and leg piece on this figure also make me grumpy. They're just so under detailed compared to the most recent Stormtrooper we've gotten. Just the prints on those are incredible. These are just dumbed down, and that frown, once again, I just can't get over it. Why is it so bad? Oh my god. Number 7 on the list technically isn't a minifigure, but I think in a discussion of figures that we'd call ugly, or things just in Star Wars that we'd call ugly, this definitely has to be in the conversation. It's the Droid Akka from the 2007 MTT set. What a just horrendous figure for them to include in an otherwise perfect Lego set. For one, it's way oversized, which you can really say about all Droid Akkas in Lego. Lego, I think, most recently has really made them a much more appropriate size, but this thing is literally like 2 or 3 times as big as it should be. And you would think that if they made it so oversized, you could then, compromise using maybe more detailed pieces to make it look even more like a Droid Akka. But no, this is probably the worst representation of a Droid Akka that Lego has ever made. It really is awful looking. Compound that with the fact that it doesn't even have the functionality of the original Droid Akka, insofar as it can't roll up, this thing's pretty much useless. I remember being so excited to get that MTT set, and then when I built this thing, I just knew this wasn't it, Chief. Number 6 on the list is going to be the Luke Skywalker that they released in not the most recent Cantina, but the one right before it, and I think this was also in the Sandcrawler set. What a mess. I think the torso and legs on this are fine. I think they're actually quite good, but that headpiece, that thing is absolutely revolting. This is the most clear example of Lego going way too far and committing way too much to the details on a minifigure, and it just looks so bad. There are way too many marks on Luke's face. Like, it looks like someone wrote all over him. This is like the modern day rapper equivalent of Luke Skywalker, with a bunch of just random writings and marks on his face. His over exaggerated cheekbones, the mark below his eye and below his mouth, there's just way too much going on with this guy's face. And the smile is kind of unsettling as well. It doesn't look like it should be Luke Skywalker. Garrett and I have unaffectionately coined this figure the handsome Squidward Luke. The exaggerated facial details just don't do this thing any favors. Now, one last thing I gotta say about this. I've often criticized the prequels for how they basically had Padme die of a broken heart and basically having no reason to live right after she had her children. I feel that having children is probably a sufficient reason to want to continue living, and if Luke and Leia found out that she didn't want to live after she had them, they'd probably be pretty angry about that. But if I found out that this is what my child would look like, I'd probably want to die too. Speaking of Padme, the next figure on the list at number 5 is going to be the Padme Clone Wars figure. You guys knew I had to have this one on the list. Now let's not kid ourselves, Natalie Portman is a beautiful woman. This minifigure is the opposite of that. The eyes are way too big, the mouth is way too big, the hairpiece sucks, everything about this figure is just pretty awful, I guess outside of the torso print maybe. This is just such an awful representation of Natalie Portman / Padme in Star Wars. There's really not much else to say about it. It just doesn't look good at all. Number 4 on the list is going to be the Clone Wars Anakin figure. This guy's pretty ugly too. With how ugly that Padme figure looks, I think they actually probably deserve each other. But the face on this thing, I just cannot get over. I remember this is one of the first figures I popped open right after Midnight Madness when the original Clone Wars sets launched. And I looked at this thing and I was just like, ugh, what have they done to my beloved Anakin Skywalker? I think that his exaggerated cheekbones are what really get me. Honestly, and I can't be the only one who sees this dude looks like Michael Jackson. You guys see it too, right? Now, this looks like Michael Jackson. I really just can't get over those giant Clone Wars bug eyes, and like I said, the just cheekbone details. This is just all around such an ugly figure. For such a handsome man in real life, they just did him no favors with this minifig. And one thing I also kind of wanted to address is, you guys will notice this list is populated by a lot of Clone Wars figures, as it deserves to be, and people will probably go in the comment section and say, once again, it's accurate to the show. LEGO was just making figures that looked like they did in the show. And nowadays, LEGO has made that much better by just giving us movie versions of those figures. So they're, one, consistent with all the other figures, and two, actually look good. But I think it's also worth noting that when like Hasbro was making just actual action figures of the Clone Wars figures, they didn't do them styled like this. They did them just styled as they would look in the film. So the precedent was definitely set for LEGO to do that. They just opted to give us horrendous looking Clone Wars figures for a long time. Number 3 on the list is Juno Eclipse. I really just don't even understand what in the world they were thinking with this figure. Mind you, this was before they were doing the Clone Wars figures. Other Star Wars figures at this period did not have these overly detailed eyes and pupils. Even in this same set, Starkiller was included. He didn't have pupils, but they decided to just give Juno Eclipse a radically different styled face, and it just totally backfired on them. This is the equivalent if they took like a Clone Wars face, like with the bug eyes and the mouth, and they just shrunk it down. Like, that style doesn't look good big, and it also doesn't look good small either. So this figure, the face specifically, just looks so bad. Also, the hair that they kind of had to print on the top of her forehead and kind of coming down the side of her face doesn't look good at all either. I understand they were attempting to give her some hair because she has an Imperial cap on, but it just looks so bad. Like, what were they thinking with this figure? It's almost like whoever was the artist for this thought it was initially going to be a Clone Wars figure, and then later on found out it wasn't, and just decided rather than redesigning it to scale everything down so it would kind of match with the other figures, but then in reality, it just ended up looking worse off. Number 2 on the list is of course gonna be Aldarbido. Here's the biggest problem with this figure. If you showed this figure to the most hardcore of hardcore Star Wars fans that didn't know much about LEGO, I guarantee you they would never guess that this is supposed to be Aldarbido. I feel like with any other figure, even some of the ones that are kind of like not the best representations of it, you can at least tell what the heck the figure is supposed to be. Looking at this, it looks like something you'd find in a child's Lego collection. Like they were just kind of playing around with parts and just kind of threw something together and left it there. And then you'd have to like take it apart and fix it to how it's actually supposed to be. But no, this is something that LEGO actually put out there. This is something they co-signed. This is something they said, this is good enough to be in a LEGO set. And it's the butt of a lot of jokes nowadays, as it deserves to be, because this thing is an absolute mess. The battle droid body with the just 3 random arms, like, I'm looking at this next to a picture of Aldarbido, and it really is difficult to tell, like what even is supposed to be what. Like, this thing just really confuses me. Like, I wonder, like, when the person was designing this, like what parts of this did they think matched up to what Aldarbido looks like? I guess if someone told me I had to make a brick build version of Aldarbido and that was gonna be like the minifigure of it, I'd probably have a hard time with it too, but there's no way I would ever think of incorporating a minifig head into it. Now, with all the other figures you've seen on this list, that only leaves one obvious choice for number 1, and that has to be Clone Wars Palpatine. This thing literally looks like something straight out of a horror film. The markings on his face, there's just way too much going on. I would say maybe this is the handsome Squidward Palpatine of the LEGO line, and this thing just looks so bad. Like, For one, and this is what I really don't understand, like the way his eyebrows kind of arch and the random marking between his eyes makes him look like he has a unibrow, which is kind of funny, but also terrifying at the same time considering everything else that's going on with this figure. They went so out of their way to make like the ridges around his eyes so black. It looks like he's wearing guy liner, and there's just like so many wrinkles and just random marks on this thing's face. It's honestly quite terrifying to look at. I understand that he's kind of like a hidden villain, so I guess they kind of wanted to make him look mean and almost menacing in a way, but like, he isn't the Emperor at this point. He's still just Palpatine. Like, go look at the films. Palpatine just looks like an old, like, helpless gentleman, you know? Like, he doesn't look terrifying. He doesn't look like freaking Chucky, but geez, they just went so out of their way to make this minifig look terrifying, which I guess in that regard, you know, mission accomplished, but it still, I feel, is the ugliest Star Wars minifigure they've ever made. Like, I can't look at this thing for too long. Let me go ahead and finish this video. So there you have it, guys. That's my top 10 list of the ugliest Star Wars minifigures. I know that when it comes to negative top 10 lists like this, a lot of people are going to have some objections, so be sure to put those in the comment section. I'd love to know where you guys disagree or even possibly agree with me on this list, and if there's any figures you think I missed that deserve to be called ugly, definitely throw those in your comment as well. That's going to finish up the video though. If you like what I do, guys, just please go ahead and hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button as well to stay tuned in to everything that's going on in the channel, and I'll see you again very soon.